All right, so here we go. We're still in NSCA Essentials of Personal Training, and we're now moving on in Chapter 10, the presentation number 4. We're still talking about fitness evaluation, selection, and administration, but now we're talking about factors affecting reliability and validity of testing. And I will say some of these things are in the control of the administrator, some are not. So as we get into this, let's go ahead and jump in. There's a certain standard of error, and it's a comparison of if you were to have a perfect test, nothing went wrong, everything went right, the person showed up, they were ready to go, well informed, etc., and they had basically a theoretical true score, if you will. Or, I'm sorry, they had a true score, which is a theoretically errorless score, if I can just say it right. Holy cow! That errorless score would be like 100% perfect. But because there are certain things that happen, people show up tired, test protocols can't be followed completely. Perhaps the cycle ergometer, the little knob is not tightening down, so you don't get the right kilopond rate. And it's a little bit difficult to have the person follow along with the metronome because they have a challenge in terms of trying to keep the beat. That now presents margins for error off of that 100%. So now think of it in terms of perfect test, true score, 100%. That's our theoretical errorless score. The person shows up a little bit tired. Well, now we're talking 97%. We have a little bit of trouble with our cycle ergometer, 95%. And perhaps there's something going on with the metronome and they can't get the cadence right to be able to do the Austrian rhyming test. Okay, so now we're at like maybe 95, 93%. But you try to, at least best you can, minimize that margin for error. And again, there's some things that are within your control as a testing administrator, and some things are just out of your control. I often talk with new trainers and I talk with clients, and we do body composition, we do hydrostatic, not hydrostatic, we do bioelectrical impedance. If we do it at 5 o'clock at night and they want to do it again, we make sure we do it at 5 o'clock at night. We want the consistency in the testing. We can't control everything they ate through the day. We can't control everything they drank through the day. We can't control how much they worked out leading into the actual assessment. But the one thing we can control is the days or the time of day that we actually do the test as one way to basically standardize our evaluation. And that allows us to maybe minimize some of that margin for error. It's not perfect. And, or rework many times in terms of fitness, it's not a perfect environment. You try to find ways to minimize some of that variability. And the factors that affect reliability come down to client factors, personal training factors, some equipment factors, and environmental factors, like I mentioned a few before. And with client factors, if we were to kind of break these out, the health status of the person, their functional capacity, their familiarity with types of movement patterns to be able to actually perform the test in the first place. What is their age, both chronological and training age? How long have they been working out? That'll matter. Their sex, male or female, pre-training status, and then the book provides some examples for each. But the one that they kind of reflect on for the quiz and the exam that we have in class, they talk about the 1 repetition test in squat can be appropriate for a conditioned individual who has previous experience with that free weight movement pattern. But for someone who has no pre-training experience, the lack of motor skill and the intensity required for the exercise may create an unacceptably high risk for injury. And there's a trade-off in here when you do testing, because you have to understand that by having people do testing, it changes their mindset in terms of performance, and they want to perform better. And oftentimes they kind of stretch their envelope a little bit to basically outperform. And in some cases, because they're deconditioned, their bodies just can't handle that extra workload, and it becomes or increases the possibility for injury. So you have to use some judgment as a trainer to be able to know what tests to use or assessments to use, and then how you're going to implement those assessments so you don't put your client in a dangerous situation. It kind of comes to your skill and expertise, right? With the personal trainer factors, there's a level of expertise that the trainer will have to be able to do the test or administer the test. Something as simple as doing body composition at the same time is an experience thing. I mean, I've done it enough as a trainer and somebody who's done 1,000 skin folds or 1,000, 1,000 bioelectrical impedance evaluations. I can tell you that to a certain degree, that's one of the areas that I can help control, and I can minimize or at least eliminate some of the problems that you have just from hydration when doing bioelectrical impedance. So I talk about this example with skinfold measurements, and they say it's a complicated skill that requires 100 opportunities on different clients for the personal trainer to gain adequate proficiency to develop, um, um, they call it inter-rater consistency. The personal trainer should perform the measurements on different sites and body types. So the idea is the more you practice, the better you'll become, the better you become, the more refined you become when actually doing those tests. From environmental, you need regular calibration of equipment, you need maintenance on equipment, and if you're going to perform, say, testing on an Austrian rhyming cycle test, cycle ergometer, one of the things you should do is have a bike that reads as A, and another bike that reads as B, and another bike that reads as C. And when you have your people come in, you can have them use the same bike. You know, this person's always on bike A, bike B, or bike C, have the same settings, etc., and be able to have that in place. And they talk about this in terms of altitude. So depending upon the altitude, I mean, where we are in Illinois, we're about what 650 feet above sea level. But depending where the person is having a test administered, they could end up having some negative effects to performing at altitude. It's called you end up with a little bit of hypoxia, but also there's acute altitude sickness where a person's body needs to process and get accustomed to having lower levels of oxygen. So they recommend that perhaps a person should have an adaptation period of 7 to 12 days before engaging in any type of aerobic endurance assessments. And I like this at the end that they put in here. The integrity of the assessment process depends on the validity and the reliability, which you've already talked about, of the assessment selected and the proper administration by a trained fitness professional. Personal trainers should take care to enhance reliability by consistently attending to controllable factors related to the client, personal trainer, equipment, and environment. So just think through some of the things I said, even something as simple as just doing bioelectrical impedance at the same time with my clients each time I do it, whether it's my 5 a.m. client always does it at 5:30 in the morning, or my evening client always does it at 5 p.m. That's an area where I can have a little bit of control in the process and minimize some of that slippage that you see in terms of reliability. All right, guys, signing off.